Welcome back, students. And in this module, we learn more about radio. Around the time where the recording industry was kind of, taking shape, radio was also under development around the same time. It was one of the first media to break through the barrier of space. With, media such as, books and newspapers and magazines, it had to be literally carried from one place to another. But with radio, things were very different because it kind of broke the concept of space. I think that was the most significant aspect of radio. Another thing you have to remember is that the newspaper, it gave an account of what happened yesterday, the next morning, and magazine gave a detailed, in-depth coverage and analysis of certain issues. But radio gave immediacy to the events that was happening around them at that point in time, because there were so many changes happening around in terms of politics, in terms of economy, in terms of the society, and people really wanted to keep themselves updated, and radio provided immediacy to events. I think that was the most key for the growth of radio, but it did not happen overnight. Just to put things in perspective, this is a statue called Pony Riders. This is in St. Joseph, Missouri, where Pony Riders, they used to carry newspapers, magazines, mail services from St. Joseph, Missouri to California, SFO, in the 1800s. It usually takes about 10 and a half days. So literally, physically, they have to carry those stuff from one place to another. This was in the Midwest region. And in the East Coast, again, when newspaper and magazine were popular, even though it was printed, it took about several days for people and readers to have access to the information. For instance, it took about 44 hours to take newspaper from New York to Washington or vice versa. And they also had services on certain days. So this is how it was before the invention of radio. We had to literally carry information from one place to another. This was in the beginning of the 1800s. But telegraph, it broke the barrier of time and space. For instance, message can be transmitted instantaneously from one point to another point, and that was the thing that was beyond comprehension at that point in time. Because imagine the same information that took about 12 days and 44 hours can be done within like few seconds, and that was possible by telegraph. And let's look at this small video from the history channel to understand the impact of telegraph.
Text messaging, 1843 style. All right, Len, today we've got a big one. Tell me what we have right here.
It's the first telegram,
Ever.
the first official telegram sent on May 24th, 1844.
Earth-shaking, of course, because it allowed people to communicate who were hundreds of miles apart from each other. It's hard to overstate how important this was.
Well, with hindsight, we can realize that this started the telecommunications revolution. To get a message from A to B, you had to physically take it there. You had to walk it, run it, get on a horse, a boat.
Or be in visual sightline, I guess.
Well, yeah. But on this day, May 24, Samuel F.B. Morse has a battery and a little key. He has strung wires 38 or so miles from Washington to Baltimore. And people knew that you could send electricity through a wire and have something happen. But the genius of Morse is that he knew what he wanted to have happen. And what he did was he was able to instantly communicate. He could send a message from here to there instantly.
By having the patterns and pulses of the signal.
A telegraph is two things. You have to be able to send a message through a wire, a single wire, send electricity from here to there, and just on off, basically. But then you have to, what is the message?
Yeah.
Is the message beep? Well, in this case, it's dot dash, dot dash.
So he invented the Morse code that we're familiar with today.
Yeah, that's why it's called Morse code. Yeah. Our conservation office has encased it in this plastic thing so we can hold it without gloves.
Because this is the original that we're holding.
This is the original, what hath God wrought? That was the first message that was sent.
So the message itself was transmitted via these impressions in the paper.
Exactly.
And then afterwards, the actual letters, which are recognizable to our eye, were added in ink below the impression. Is that correct?
Exactly. He was a very religious man.
Hence the phrase, what hath
God
God wrought?
wrought? And there is a question mark at the end, if you'll notice there. Now, Morse knew that this was an historic document. He embellished it with, first of all, writing the alphabetical letter underneath each dots or dash. And then across the top, he wrote in his own hand here, this sentence was written from Washington by me at the Baltimore terminus at 8:45 a.m. on Friday, May 24, 1844, being the first ever transmitted from Washington to Baltimore by telegraph. Then he signed it Samuel F.B. Morse, Superintendent of Electromagnetic Telegraph. And that was his title.
It appears that Morse was very aware at the time of the implications of this invention.
Yeah, he was, and the message is especially appropriate. Len Bruno, Manuscript Specialist for Science and Technology, Library of Congress.
So that was the history of telegraph, but actually Morse did not come up with the Morse code. It was his assistant Alfred Vail who actually completely compiled the Morse code, and actually Samuel Morse, he took credit for that. I mean, stuff like that happens. And also, this is also a very important invention in the field of
And on this day in
telecommunications.
1876, Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone. In his early work with the deaf deepened his interest in transmitting speech electrically, so he invented the electrical speech machine.
Honey, come here. I want you.
The device was a ringing success and signaled the future of communication.
And that's this day in history.
So as you see, I think sending messages and sending voice over the wires was very important in terms of the growth. But then it also adds some shortcomings, because what happens is the voice or necessarily the wire sometimes it got cut and it got disconnected. So there were always some issues, and they were finding ways to do this as a wireless telegraph. I think that was the one thing that was constantly at the back of many scientists, and it was Heinrich Hertz who actually worked on the radio waves, that he kind of came up with this theory that we can send sound, or we can use the sound waves to kind of transfer voice from one place to another. And actually it was the sincere effort by Guglielmo Marconi, where he is considered the father of radio. He made the first wireless breakthrough, and I think that was something that laid the foundation for radio. And I think he worked on that for several years, and he developed a clear system to send and receive radio signals. And again, I think he was actually the first one to broadcast use radio waves in the United States. I think it was in the early part of the 20th century, but it was actually Reginald Fessenden who's also credited as the father of radio, because I think it's documented that he was the first to broadcast music and voice around 1906. But I still feel radio is something that was a work in progress. So there were many people who were experimenting with radio, but I think Reginald Fessenden actually was credited with actually dedicating his life for the growth of radio. So he is also considered a father of radio. Another important figure is Lee De Forest, where both a lot of scientists prior to Forrest, they were able to transmit voice from one place to another and worked on various aspects. But Lee De Forest worked on the physical technology behind radio, because sometimes to boost the voice they needed some kind of technology, and he came up with this Audion, where they were able to kind of boost the quality of the voice that was transmitted from one place to another. So it was not just one person, there are several people who helped in the growth of radio. And we can talk about a lot of other people, but I'm limiting just to 2 or 3 people so that you have an understanding. This was not an invention that happened overnight, but it took several years of hard work and contribution by many scientists to come to a point in terms of working or putting together a good quality radio broadcast. But as you can see, the first radio broadcast, commercial radio broadcast, happened on November 2nd, 1920. So even though Marconi was trying to kind of use radio waves to send a voice from one place to another, it took almost 25 years to come to a point where they were actually able to use radio as a commercial station. And it was only in the beginning, it was only for 1 hour. The schedule was around 8:30 to 9:30, because that was the time when people were just coming back from work and relaxing, and they thought that'll be a good time to reach that particular audience. It also took 2 more years for the radio to understand the potential of using commercials for programming. And ever since that, there is no looking back. They understood that radio itself was an advertiser's medium, and the programming was all structured in such a way that the advertisers was funding for the production of programs, and thereby making money for the radio station as well. So WEAF is the first radio station that used a commercial in its broadcast, and the spot was about $50 in 1922. And just to put things in perspective, radio is a great advertising medium because, first of all, it's very inexpensive to produce. All you need is basic gadgets to kind of get your voice across the radio stations. And second thing is, radio is a very intimate medium. That's what I should say. Because tell me, when was the last time you listened to a radio with a group of friends? Maybe if you're traveling, but mostly if you're listening to radio, you will be with the radio by yourself. You are alone with the radio. So it's a very kind of intimate medium, and it is something that people spend a lot of time. And there is also some statistics, I think, which I have incorporated into the next few slides. Still, radio is considered a most effective medium to reach a large audience. And as you can see, there are 244 million Americans aged 12 and older in a week listen to radio at some point. So radio still has some kind of significance in our lives. And let's look at, where do people listen to radio? Do you think people listen to radio in their home or dorm or office or car? And you can see most of the time the people are driving. That's when they listen to radio. And these are the statistics from Radio Advertising Bureau. And this is also just to keep in mind that yes, people listen to radio at office or at home, but while driving is the time when people spend a lot of time on radio. So radio is a kind of a great advertisers medium. In that way, they can connect with their audiences. But as you was talking about, it was all the radio stations' aim was mostly making money, commercials, and it had a lot of concepts. Like there were a lot of formats. There are a lot of ready-made formats, like drama and music and sports and lots of other stuff. But there were also very little radio stations that allotted time to kind of reach out to the public, giving them information that they really need. So there was a vacuum in the field of radio to give viewers and audiences and listeners a view that gives them the priority, that has public welfare as the priority, which was absent in mainstream radio, commercial radio stations. And the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967 helped in the foundation of National Public Radio in 1970 in FM. So in radio, there are two signals. One is FM and another one is AM signals. FM stands for frequency modulated signals, and AM stands for amplitude modulated signals, where AM reaches to a large audiences. I mean, for instance, you can use the AM radio waves to do a talk show that can be broadcast from New York to Dallas or in Chicago. But the frequency modulation wavelengths are very, very limited to a certain locality. For instance, it cannot travel far, but AM signals can travel far. And that's why you have most of the talk shows and all this talk shows and news shows are basically trimmed towards the AM waves, and FM is geared more towards music stations and entertainment, because it's very limited to a very small area. And I think NPR started in 1970 in FM, and All Things Considered was one of the programs that they started, and it's still very popular, and it was considered an alternative for commercial networks. And radio had kind of advantage which was very useful to reach the audiences, but also there was a demand to understand what people are listening to and what are the radio stations they are listening to. So there was a kind of a demand for that as well, and Nielsen used their experiences in terms of analyzing the audiences, and they pretty much collect listeners data. And earlier there was another company called Arbitron. They also were collecting radio listeners data, but then Nielsen and Arbitron merged together, and Nielsen is the only rating agency that gives us radio listeners data in the United States. And they're using various technologies. They use physical diaries and personal portable meter, where physical diaries they send it out to certain people, and they are asked to write down the diary and what time they're listening to radio and all that stuff, and over a period of time they will mail back that to Nielsen. And personal portable meter are attached to radio in the people's home, thereby they will monitor which radio stations they're listening to and how long they're listening to. So these are some of the ways they are collecting data, and thereby they feed the advertisers, saying like these are the most listened to radio stations, and thereby advertisers fix the rate for those shows. So again, radio is a great platform, and just like magazine, it also reaches to very targeted audience, segmented audience, and that's one of the advantages of radio. I will explain to you what you mean by segmenting of radio audience. For instance, take for instance top 40 format. Okay, top 40 is a concept that was pioneered by Gordon McClendon and Todd Stores. They was thinking like, no, they didn't want to put out some random music at random time, but they also wanted to pick the top 40 songs in an order that people can have a kind of a countdown that reaches to the top. And this format was so much popular, it is still very much in vogue. I think last month they celebrated the 47 year of the top 40 format. As you all know, format is nothing but that's ready-made formats that the radio stations use to kind of fill in the broadcast hours. For instance, you have talk shows, you have country, you have pop, you have Hispanic shows. So there are many formats, because radio stations use these ready-made formats to fill up their hours. And these are the top 10 radio stations with the top 40 format. And as you can see, WHTZ FM New York, Kiss FM Los Angeles. You might be wondering why they're using WK and all this stuff, and it's just nothing but it's something to do way back in the early period. If any radio station that is on the east side of Mississippi, it's actually coded with W, and if it's on the west side, it's coded with K. That's what this is similar with television stations as well. So when you see something with W, it's something to do with the direction of the Mississippi River. If it's the west side, it's the it starts with a W. If it's on the west, if it's on the east side, it starts with W. It's on the west side, it starts with K, something like that. So that's these are some of the stations that are there, which incorporates the top 10, top 40 formats. And again, these are some of the popular formats: news, talk, information shows, adult contemporary, top 40, Spanish, and country stations. And if you look at the face of it, you might think one of the most listened or radio stations might be some music stations or top 40 stations, but actually you'll be surprised. The number one radio show in this country is called the Rush Limbaugh Show, which has about 13.25 million listeners. And again, Morning Edition is the number 2 with Sean Hannity at number 3. All Things Considered is number 4, and Delilah is number 5. So you look at this thing, when you look at the network, it'll tell you it's Premiere, it's NPR, it's self-syndicated, which means Premiere is a kind of syndicated agencies where they produce programs for television and radio stations. So they are private companies, and they produce programs and sell it to radio stations across the United States. So Rush Limbaugh show is actually a private production, but they are sold to radio stations, and thereby it's popular. And the broadcast time is also very important. As I told, most of the people, 60% of the population listen to radio while they're driving. So that's what is called as AM drive and PM drive, where AM drive is morning drive and PM drive is people when they drive after work. So this is just to kind of give you an understanding. There is still a big chunk of people that listen to talk show, and it's not for you and me. It's people who are pretty much like 50 plus or senior citizens, where they want to really know what's happening around them, and radio is a great way where they can multitask as well as listen to what people have got to say about certain important political issues, thereby going back. Segmentation of audience. For instance, if someone is listening to Rush Limbaugh show, so advertisers can pretty much promote something like AARP or some insurance and some products that is geared more towards mid-level and senior citizen people. So that's what is called segmentation of audience. And for instance, if you see Delilah, it'll be pretty much a crowd which is above 25-30 plus, mostly women, so they can gear towards those kind of audience, and the brand can actually reach out to them as well. So this is how they structure, based on the format, the advertisers will advertise their product and thereby reach the audiences. And this is how radio station works. And this is again just to kind of give a small screenshot of the top 5 radio stations with the most listener base in the United States. And we have about 15,330 stations, out of which 6,000 are FM stations, 4,000 odd are AM stations. There are about 4,000 non-profit FM stations. As I told you, the difference between FM and AM is FM waves travel very it's got a very limited range, and they usually play music in the radio stations, and it's usually confined to the cities. And AM stations, actually AM waves travel farther, so the news and talk shows and information shows works better on AM stations. And the number has actually held steady in the last few years, but we have to wait and watch what happens in the years to come to see whether these numbers are going up or going down. And this is one of the reason we should be worried about the numbers of radio stations, because as I told you about the convergence, the melding of communications and computers and electronic industries are kind of changing the way people are accessing information, because radio transmission by satellite, it actually completely it voids the concept of AM and FM. Because for instance, if you're going from Canada to Mexico, I think with the satellite radio you won't have any problem in terms of transmission, because the message is beamed towards satellite, and you can have uninterrupted music or broadcast service with the satellite radio. And initially there were 2 different platforms, Sirius radio and XM radio, and they found it is better for them to come together rather than be on a separate platforms. And right now Sirius XM boasts about 30 million subscribers, and I think these numbers would have definitely gone up by now. But just to kind of give you the understanding that satellite radio is also a big growing market, and this also is leading to the fact there is more demand for radio programming and radio content as well. And again, just like magazine where you have only online magazine like Slate and Salon, there is also a web radio where the delivery of radio is done over the internet. So what happens is most of the radio stations, what they're doing is they also kind of integrating their web presence as well. So there are some radio stations where they have radio stations, and in addition they also have a web radio. For instance, I was working at WSIU and then there they had a WSIU radio, as well as they had WSIU radio on online as well. So there are some radio which uses both the aspects, where they use the FM waves, as well as they're also using the online web services to get to their audiences as well. And the second thing is podcast. Again, podcast is also something that's growing at a very fast pace. These are the same, similar, just like radio. They are also podcast. But what is the advantage of podcast is more like an MP3 file, where it can be recorded and where it can be downloaded or streamed and stored on a service usually, and it can be retrieved anytime. But the concept of podcasting, initially it was taking time for getting popular, because what happens is, first you will have to see what podcast you like, then you will have to download to your computer, and then you will have to transfer it to your iPod. So it was a little complicated a few years back, but right now they have made it very simple, where if you can just download an app or something, it gives you access to thousands of podcasts on various topics. There are some podcasts. I think there was a very popular podcast on Serial, where what they did was they basically got to talk to people who were into, like, very difficult circumstances. I think one of the very popular podcasters, there was this guy, I forgot his name. He was imprisoned for allegedly killing his girlfriend, and these people managed to do an interview with him and found out that he had nothing to do with the crime, but still he was sitting in jail. And there were many other topics that they were doing, and which actually gave them a lot of exposure in terms of podcasts. And there are also a lot of podcasters who specialize in politics. I was listening to a podcaster who specialized in technology. He was giving a lot of tips and hacks of technology, how to kind of make your life much easier. And again, usually it's an MP3 file that can be downloaded or streamed. And again, it's also a phenomenon that's fast catching up. And the other aspect is called bitcasters. I don't know, many of you might not be familiar with bitcasters. So what happens is, bitcasters are nothing but radio stations that can be accessed online over the World Wide Web. So pretty much they are radio stations, but the fact is they are only available over the World Wide Web. Just like magazines like Slate and Salon, these are people that are available only online, and they are not using any radio waves or anything. So they just pretty much broadcast through the World Wide Web. And one such example is this station. It had such good quality. I used to love this music, 103.1. I think it was based in Los Angeles, but then I think it shut down because it was not kind of profitable. And I really like the quality of music that was played on this particular site, 103.1. And again, this is again there are a lot of bitcasters, and this one again also has got good quality. I think let's try listening to this Radio Free Brooklyn to see how it sounds. Just want to kind of give you the yes, listen live. So with that, I think we'll finish the segment on radio. I hope you kind of had a better understanding of how the radio evolved, and how it's trying to adapt itself to changing technological innovations that's happening. And we'll have to wait and watch what the future of the radio looks like. But when compared to other mass media, I think radio is in a very comfortable position, and we just have to wait and watch whether it's going to go up or go down. And you try to finish the class test by 11 p.m. tonight, and you all have a nice day.